Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Point of No Return podcast. Hoping that you're having a good summer. It's been a few weeks since the last episode, and today I had a really good conversation with Louis Duchesne, Executive Vice-President and General Manager of Cossette, Quebec. Louis grew up in the web space, kind of like myself, in the early 2000s, late 90s in his case. And we spoke about a lot about how the space has changed. He's an industry veteran in the agency world. So we spoke about how Cossette specifically transformed from being more of a traditional agency to really today fully integrated with digital being more than half of their revenues. We spoke about his current priorities, and the notion of talent, recruiting, and employer branding really came up several times. We also had a good conversation about, the hype around about technology and digital. So things like, the overemphasis on data, and also for the media landscape, which today is struggling. And someone from, Louis' perspective has very interesting insights as to, some of the challenges that they're seeing for legacy media players and how maybe they can overcome them. So it was a really wide-ranging conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it. One of the first areas I want to dive with you, Louise, how did you get into this whole digital space? I feel like you got into it, you've been a dinosaur in it, you've been in it for a while.
Yeah, it's funny because it's almost by luck, actually. I was born and raised in Montreal, actually in Ville-Saint-Laurent, north in Montreal. And I went to McGill, and so right after I finished my degree, I got a job offer from a McGill alumni, so someone I knew from McGill. Who had started with a bunch of other McGill students, a new company called Open-Face Internet. So that was probably late 90s, 99, 98, 99.
And what did Open-Face do exactly?
Yeah, Open-Face was both an ISP, so an internet service provider. So they were basically selling internet services. Initially it was, remember the time, 56K dial-up connection and all that. Yeah. So ISP on one side, and on the other side, a web development firm. So developing websites, one of the first websites for many clients, web services and whatnot. So essentially I was out of school, so got that job offer. Sure, let's give it a try. So essentially, I first started as biz dev, account management, and then got to learn more about technology, web marketing, and so forth. So so stayed there for about 3 years. And it's funny because it was very interesting because I got there, we were probably 15-ish employees, and by the time I left 2 years later, 2.5 years later, we were probably 50, 60 employees, So it was remember the internet bubble? So it was essentially the internet bubble. Great experience. It was fun. Got to learn a lot of autonomy. So that's how I got into the digital space. Then I moved to work at Nurun. Remember Nurun?
Yeah.
It still exists, actually.
It's still around.
Yeah,
got
sure,
bought,
of course.
but it's
it
still
got bought
around.
Initially it got bought. It used to be owned by Quebec Media at the time when I was at Nurun. Then got acquired, 2 years ago by Publicis. Yeah, the group. Still exists. So I stayed there for 5-6 years, I guess, and then moved to Cossette. Initially to run. At the time, Cossette was the structure was various business divisions, one for web, one for direct marketing, one for media, and so forth. So at the time I was running one of the Quebec City office, actually. It was called Fjord at the time. So it was basically the digital unit of Cossette. And then a year after, got a chance to take over the office in Quebec City, so got to run the overall agency. And now I've been in the role of Executive Vice-President at Cossette Canada and General Manager of the province, essentially Eastern Canada, but mostly the province of Quebec. So we have Montreal, we have Quebec City, and we also have an smaller office in Halifax.
Yeah, for the past 4 years around.
Yeah, past 4 years. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious. So you going back to the early years, what do you think got you interested in, obviously the space was growing, you're part of like a high growth company, and Nurun was obviously growing as well after Open Face.
Sure.
What aspect of working in the quote unquote internet/digital space piqued your interest that you're like, hey, you know what, I'm going to make a career out of this?
Yeah. To some degree, I don't consider myself a true entrepreneur because I never started my own business like you did, actually. But I do have an entrepreneurial spirit. And for some reason, I felt that, when you look at the digital space back at the days, but even today, there are so many opportunities. There's so many new services, products that you can sell. There's new ways to approach clients. There's new experience that you can offer to customers. So it's this entrepreneurial spirit that lies within the digital space, I guess, that attracted me. The fact that it changes a lot, changes quickly. I'm fairly impatient. So I like it. I like it when, it moves fast. I did a lot of sports in my life, so I like it when there's a lot of action. So there's definitely a lot of action in the digital space, right? So I would probably say, entrepreneurial spirit, and also, fast pace.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that. Obviously, we kind of grew up in the same kind of period, and particularly in that time, it felt like such a sea change. Because you went from things being kind of like static to like, oh shit, like things are changing all the time, right? Yeah. So like, we both started, there weren't none of the big platforms, and I think Google was still early days in terms of it's like, at least it's the advertising component of it.
Yep.
And it really is kind of like the fountain of youth, right? Because you keep having to learn what's going on, right?
Yep.
And at this point now it's kind of become normal. So the scale of change is kind of like it's kind of taking over.
Yep.
But in the early days, it was like, you just had to really be on your toes, always learning. And it kind of gave you an edge if you're in that space, because if you want it or not, you have to kind of stay up to date.
Yeah.
And I guess you parlayed that knowledge, that skill set to kind of grow into more senior roles.
Sure. And it's also interesting because I'm fairly happy with the background I have, because even though I'm not an IT specialist per se, right? Just the fact that I got a chance to work in those web shops, got me to learn a lot about technology. How do you approach technology? How do you manage risk? And so forth. So it's interesting today to have this experience, in business overall, I would say. Yeah,
it's interesting. And then, so now you've been 10 years at Cossette, you're leading Eastern Canada.
Yep.
What do you think is different from let's say from a technology or digital perspective in your role? Like, what do you think's changed from, your role? Obviously now you're overseeing, the entire Eastern Seaboard, like you're managing your own P&L.
Yep.
How do you stay up to date when it comes to digital and tech? And the subsequent question to that is, what do you think what has changed at Cossette, today versus 10 years ago? So I know it's two big questions, but
let's start with the second one. As you can imagine, given my background, I was initially, hired to actually, digitize Cossette to some degree, or contribute to digitization of Cossette. And we did it. Honestly, today, even though we could, we've been around for 47 years now. Cossette was founded in 1972. We, more than 50% of our total revenues now come from digital. It's probably closer to 60 actually.
Wow. Yeah. So I mentioned 10 years ago, like that number was much smaller.
Yeah. Right? 10-ish, 5-ish. Yeah, exact. So it's quite rapid growth. And thank God we did it, because of course we wouldn't have our size today. So even though you could consider Cossette, and we are an integrated agency, and we still do some work in some fields that you could pretend are more traditional, you could say, right, such as advertising and media buy and all that. All these disciplines, we've injected some digital mindset into them, right? Give you another example of that. We have a fairly strong expertise in branding and design, right? Well, now when we think of a new brand or a rebranding of an existing brand, we always consider first how it's going to act, how it's going to behave, how it's going to live in the digital channels, right? Versus 10 years, 15 years ago, the first touch point you would probably look at is, what's going to be, what your brochure, your corporate brochure is going to look like, and your business card and whatnot, right? So we've injected a lot of digital mindsets in all our existing expertise, our integrated expertise. So pretty much not every employee at Cossette now is a digital specialist, but every employee, every talent at Cossette, plays in the digital world to some degree, right? And the challenge I would say is making sure that everyone gets what's the new reality of a digital, universe, but, maintaining also stronger expertise and the right level of depth in some area, right? Like one-to-one, for instance, like SEO, web development, web architecture, data, right?
Yeah, I see you almost like a web guy that's running an ex-traditional agency, right? So it's like
kind of.
It used to be traditional. So I'm curious to hear you on how the transition happened, right?
Yeah.
From like where few people understood what it was to now where it's predominantly digital. Like you mentioned, kind of like the T-shape, right? Like even if someone has like a very deep expertise in something, they need to have expertise in digital, like let's say at the top level.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you think was the toughest part in that in transitioning the agency from like an older model, which I imagine a lot of fundamental questions were asked probably around business model as well, right?
Sure,
so they're curious as to how that happened.
Sure. I would say that I guess the biggest challenge isn't technology per se. The biggest challenge is talent management. And it's interesting. A couple of years ago, we've implemented a new operational model within the agency here in Montreal. It was you could argue that it was a fairly obvious and simple way of just reshuffling the way we're structured, right? Like for instance, we haven't implemented the agile methodology per se, but we used some of the learnings we had with some projects working agile and basically creating our own methodology, inspired by agile, but not fully on. So you could argue that it wasn't such a big change, but never. I can honestly tell you, I personally underestimated the importance of change management. Okay, so you could easily think that it's obvious and the world has changed, digital is everywhere now. We got to change the way we work. We got to change our business model and whatnot. But it's not a given. When you're someone who's been doing a particular job for several years in a particular way, asking him or her to change and be open to that change isn't necessarily obvious for everyone.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And not to sound negative, seriously. I mean, our people are great and they've been open to that change, but I have to admit that there was a need for change management, a greater need than I expected initially.
Yeah, I can imagine some of it is painful too, because it's not, you'd have to also consider, is the right people on the bus, right? So you have to
But you see, with that regard, my approach was to give a chance to everyone, versus, arbitrarily deciding that you're not going to be able to adapt, and your colleague is on board because I feel he's going to be better at adapting to the new world, the new structure. We basically announced the new way of operating and offered everyone a chance to jump on board and be open to that change. Most, I would say, by the way, the majority are still with us today, and maybe initially there was a little, there was a few bumps here and there, but they're now happy with the new way of working at Cossette. We lost a few that perhaps for them it was too challenging. Yeah. But in the end, I would say the majority are still on board, and they're now happy with the way we work, right?
Well, it's not surprising, because also, like, from one of my experience with your company is that it's usually very entrepreneurially minded people.
Yeah,
also
much.
happens to be, this might sound like a stereotypical comment, but it's typically younger people, right? So they're more amenable to trying new things, and like they're more, let's say, aware of new technology. So I'm sure that must have helped. Maybe to switch gears and talk about it more as your point of view of like leading, a large portion of the company. How do you think about strategies? Like, curious as to like, do you see strategy as like a one-time exercise? Do you see something that you're continuously thinking about? Like, considering that you're now playing in a playing field where that's changing rapidly, as we were speaking about just right before we started recording. So curious to think about how you look at it really from a strategic perspective.
Sure, I would say that strategically, If back in the days you could put together a 5-year plan, right, for a business like us, nowadays it's an ongoing strategy. So of course we have a foundation, and it's not to say that we change our structure or our business model with major moves every month, right? But on an ongoing basis, we reflect on our strategy, and we looked at what do we need to adapt on an ongoing basis, seriously. So it's almost like an ongoing mindset. I have to say that personally, I'm someone who's, as much as I can be pretty confident in what we need to do and all that. I'm always, on the edge of my seat, right? Sitting on the edge of my seat. So it forces you, it forces me, it forces our team to always ask questions, doubt. I think it's safe today to have some doubts, right? Yeah. And to say, are we doing the right thing? Yeah. Are we approaching this particular challenge the right way? So that forces you to have an ongoing reflection on strategy.
Yeah, what's the expression? Only the paranoid survive, right? So it's like, I think it's even that expression's on steroids today. Yeah. So maybe without sharing the exact specifics, I'd be curious as to what are the key priorities, strategically for Cossette Quebec, without revealing exactly, but curious as to what are the themes that you guys look at?
The first thing that would come to my mind is talent. As much as we're talking a lot about digital and technology, we're a people business, right? And if you read the news every day, you're gonna read articles about scarcity of resources, lack of resources. All these companies that are looking for new people, more staff, and I could be even more specific. It's not so much a scarcity of resources or talents; it's a scarcity of skill sets. And for me, it's different. So it's skilled employees or skilled talent that we're looking for. And it's interesting. I have to be honest, it's interesting, and it's a fairly big challenge for us because 10, 15 years ago, it was still a fairly important challenge for us, right? But talents would either work at Cossette or potentially go and work in another agency, right? Nowadays, in an ecosystem, in a business ecosystem like Montreal, the competitors can come from anywhere, right? It could be another agency, sure, or a similar agency. It can be a startup. It can be on the client side, where they want to build their internal expertise in digital data, SEO, name it all, right? So it's becoming a really, really important challenge for us. So not only to make sure that we can recruit the best talent, but also retain, right? So, and it's the same for our clients. I on a fairly regular basis, I have lunches or I have, meetings with our CMOs or even CEOs of some of the companies that we work for, right? And, one of their number one pain right now is the same, is how can we attract, talent? How can we, make sure we have the right skill sets, in their respective, in their own business, right? In their own industry. So we actually developed a new or reinforced an existing offering we had, which is in what we call employee value proposition and employer branding. So it's actually a fairly it's a business that's growing a lot for us this year. Because as you can imagine, there's a lot of clients that are asking us for that service.
And probably not too many people that do it well also, right?
Exactly.
On a micro scale, I find we suck at that, right? I find it's one of our strategic priorities. We call them epics internally. Sure. Our third one is employer branding, right? It's how do we attract talent, getting the name out there? And it's we suck on social media. So I could definitely see, a company that, hey, we need to build this as a core competency. Yep. Because the fight for talent, like you said, is pretty fierce right now. Yep. What would be number 2 or 3?
2 or 3 would be I would call it, in a broader term, one-to-one marketing. So how is this going to evolve?
Like personalization, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, for me, one-to-one is how do you use data properly to personalize the relationship between a brand and consumer? How can you build a long-standing relationship between a brand and a customer as well throughout the customer journey? It's a practice that I have to say that we have heavily invested in the past few years. A good example of that is, I don't know if you sometimes go to ACQ here in Quebec, but, the program that's called ACQ Inspire. Yeah. So it's really delivering on that promise. So using properly the data, to improve the customer experience, personalize that experience as well, be more relevant, have the proper level of information, education, but also even commercial offering, like promos and different, various sets of activations, to really personalize our relationship. And it's working well, seriously, I have to say. So that's the field that's something I'm taking a close look at right now, and what's the type of expertise that we need to reinforce or we need to add to our existing skill set.
Yeah. And you guys were always strong. I remember in my previous life when I worked with you guys, you were always strong in CRM, right? Yeah. So it's kind of a natural extension. Like, definitely a huge user of SAQ Inspire, and like you can see that the program works well. It's well thought out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe to switch gears, talk about the external side of like the agency environment. So you mentioned some of the broader threats, right? So like, and a company wants to internalize.
Internalize for sure is a threat.
Curious as to like what are the main threats that you see?
Yeah.
And
internalize is one. Second is we're an integrated agency, so we really deliver on a 360 offering. We have internal capabilities in most, if not all, marketing or communication disciplines. So it's always making sure that we always get a chance to deliver strong value to our clients, right? And some could argue that in today's world, it's better to be a specialized company where you deep dive on one specific expertise, right? But it's interesting because as I just mentioned, I used to work in a web agency or web shop, right? And it's interesting. I sometimes felt that there was a bias, within our work, in a sense that if you're a client and you hire me as a web agency, of course I won't tell you that, you should invest in a TV spot, right? In order to sell, whatever.
Well, the reverse is true also, right? It's like,
but then again, in our case, given that we're an integrated agency and we have the different expertise in-house, what I'm expecting from, and we're expecting from our business leaders, so people who oversee a relationship with clients, is making sure that we're unbiased in the sense that we're going to really recommend what's the what we feel objectively is the right approach or right go-to-market strategy.
How do you fight against that natural human tendency to want to push things, that products or services that have higher margin, right?
Yeah,
it's going to be tough. I've lived that on not specifically with Cossette, but with other agencies, and like it's not malicious on their behalf. It's like we make more profit doing big TV campaigns than SEM, for instance, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm curious as to how you really
Honestly, it's not such a big concern for me. The concern is more that I feel that human beings, and I think it's just natural, tend to sell what they know, right? So if you're savvy in whatever TV spots, you're most likely going to be more comfortable selling a TV spot, right? Versus an SEO specialist, right? Who's going to probably tell you should invest all your money in SEO. So it's more making sure that we can make sure that all our talents have the proper knowledge set to really be able to make the proper recommendations to our clients, right? So that's a challenge that we face.
I've been outside of the space for a while, like the agency world, and like depending, if you read the headlines today, right, it's like the agencies are dead, or digital agencies are dead. Like there's always some kind of new like buzzword headline. I'm curious to see it from someone that's a practitioner and like you're and a leader in the space. How do you see the future of agencies, right? Like you obviously, you touched upon some of those aspects, right? So I think you probably, like one-to-one marketing, the importance of data and relationships. So curious as to how maybe at a broader level beyond that, what you think about, what should be the future of Cossette?
Mm-hmm. I feel it's we're becoming more and more a consultant for our client. More and more clients, at least Cossette clients, come to us when yes, of course, for various questions about their brand, about their go-to-market strategy, about their comms and all that, but more and more about how they should transform themselves. We were talking about employer branding, change management, how they adapt their own structure in order to deliver on this new business model that they need to put forward. I feel it's funny because we also read in the news that, consultant, the Deloitte of the world and all that are starting to come and eat our lunch, right? I think it's going on both ways. I feel we're, at least at Cossette. And I think it's the fact that we can on demand bring, various sets of expertise, because we have such a bench strength, internally. Yeah. I think there's a lot of value into this, still today, but also in the future.
Yeah. Is it leading you guys to be maybe more acquisitive, acquiring certain skills, for instance?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Because we're seeing it, like, for instance, like an Accenture is being, they're started as consulting and now they're moving down the stack, right?
Exactly.
They're being quite aggressive in that regard, right?
Yeah. But I for sure, I think it makes sense. And we're taking a close look at what these guys are doing, to be honest. But, I think the importance of creativity is still key in today's world. Yeah. And it's in our roots, right, at Cossette, to be creative, to innovate. Not to suggest that an Accenture of the world or a Deloitte and whatnot can't be creative.
You could suggest it.
That's not what I'm suggesting. No, that's not what I'm suggesting.
Yes and no, I think you can.
I'm just saying it may not be, naturally within a DNA of a company like that, to be honest. Whereas us, it's been at the core of a business for 46 years, right?
Well, what's the expression, right? A company ships its org structure, right? So it's like if these companies, their DNA is not, having creative roots, I think it's a fair comment to say, they're not going to be strong in it. I think they can acquire, right? Like they did with, I think, Droga 5, for instance.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a big move.
Building it like internally is much tougher. I think buying it makes more sense. And, going back to your point of creativity, I buy that point full on because, despite all the advances of algorithms, like, human creativity is not going away, right? And like, that's what I think with air quotes, a brand still very much needs, right? Particularly in a world where, as the analytics aspect, the more, let's say, mathematical, analytical aspect of a brand becomes much more commoditized, right?
Yep.
As the platforms make it easier to, run campaigns, well, then the only way to really differentiate yourself is going to be via some other method, right? So being creative.
Exactly. Right, and there's a part in technology and data that's becoming more, all about automation now. So it's the machine who's going to do it. So what's going to remain required from someone like us or an agency like us is creativity, right? So that's not going to go away, I feel.
What are you most excited about? Like that's coming down the pipe, things that, like you said, you're always at the edge of your seat. So what are you looking at around the corner that hasn't come yet? You're like, hey, this is interesting. I
feel it's interesting. I think AI is interesting. We formed a joint venture with Strategy AI. We announced that a little less than a year ago. I think there's a lot of great opportunities for an agency like us, but also for some of our clients. So that's exciting. So you see that's a good example of our mindset. Rather than because one could easily be worried about AI and automation and it's going to transform a business like ours. Yes, but we embrace that, right? And rather than, pushing away and pushing back on this, we actually decided to invest and to form that joint venture with Strategy AI so that we can actually, influence, the way it's going to impact our business. Yeah. So that's one. Second is what I was referring to is all the, the consulting and, helping our clients, yes, in terms of marketing and communication, but also in terms of strategy, in terms of transformation, change management, and whatnot. So that's interesting.
What do you think's happening in the space that you think is not capturing enough attention in your estimation? Right? You of course, things like automation, machine learning, definitely getting a lot of play. But curious as to what do you think is like, this is not being spoken about.
Yeah, there's two elements. One that's fairly provocative, I have to admit. And it's actually, there's probably too much emphasis, in some cases at least, on data. And I call it being data obsessed. And not to mention a particular client, but you'd be surprised sometimes when we do some assignments with some of our clients. It's something to get access to all that data, right? But sometimes you can easily lose track of your main marketing and communication objective because you have such a large amount of data. You tend to look only at those KPIs and I'll be even more provocative. You can actually masturbate with data, right, to some degree,
right.
And you just lose track. Okay, so what are we trying to accomplish here?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can always ask me for what's my ideal cost per click and cost per acquisition, and that, of course, I'm not pushing back on the importance of data and all these measures. What I'm suggesting is that let's making sure that we find, the right balance as what's the importance of the data that we capture, but also making sure that we keep our main objectives in mind all the times, right? Yeah. And data should fuel creativity. Data should not kill creativity.
Yeah.
So that's one. Second is the media landscape. That worries me a lot, I have to admit, as a professional in marketing and communication, but also as a citizen. The fact that news media, print media are struggling these days. Here, it's everywhere, right, in the world, but it's also true in Quebec. It worries me a lot. They, of course, and most of them are already acting on it, but they need to reinvent their business models. But they have big challenges. It's tough financially. It's tough, and I fear a situation where we would lose some of these news media. And I think I feel it's a threat for our democracy, seriously, and I think it's a threat for our society. Yeah. Now, can you fight against the fact that, Facebook and Google and all these guys are capturing most of the ad spend right now? Maybe not. But I just hope that we're going to find a way to maintain these news property in a society like ours, because I think it's a must.
Yeah, I can't pretend to have a solution, but it is a topic I'm very passionate about, and we've done a lot of work in the field without sharing too much. But
sure.
If I had the solution, I'd probably, I'd be on a beach somewhere. It's not an easy one. It's a systemic change that's occurring right now. So it's like, traditional media, quote unquote, is in structural decline. And, it's not, there's the cord cutters, there's the cord nevers. It's really across all the broad spectrum of media. And then it's also a lot of the more legacy advertisers are just also shifting, being challenged, right, by new technology incumbents.
Yep.
So their investments, in their P&Ls, they're dropping their marketing and sales costs, right? Mm-hmm. So like they're going to see, it's kind of like this vicious circle. But fundamentally, going back to your point about news in particular, I completely agree with your point, right? So like a well-informed society is really necessary.
Yep.
And one can argue there's always been a bias, right? So like big corporations that pay,
Sure.
But I find right now it's more insidious because you really cut the legs under from these news publishers, right? Which don't have the means to change their business model quickly enough. So like the end state I see in here is that you're going to have fewer media players that are going to be, essentially audience sponsored. Exactly. That's the only way that there's going to be any kind of like surviving news media. I think some big players will, like the bigger players will survive. Like obviously it's playing out maybe a bit more in advance in the States, like, Washington Post, LA Times, New York Times are all pretty good examples of how people have pivoted their business models and moved much more to digital subscriptions.
You're right.
And I think the same is going to happen in Canada. Where it's going to really suck is going to be local players, right? Like the small local players, right? So
because you need a critical mass of readers, right?
So it's like La Revue in Terrebonne, it's the smaller players like that. It's going to be tougher for them,
for sure,
to really kind of figure it out just because of critical mass, as you mentioned.
And I was talking a lot about talent in during our conversation, but the importance of diversity and inclusion is also a key concern for us. In our own workforce at Cossette, but also in today's society and being open to diversity and inclusion. So I feel that if ever we lose some of those news media, it's gonna have an impact on also the openness of our society with regards to diversity.
Yeah, exactly, and it's playing out in different ways, right? Like everyone's talked about elections in the States, for instance. Well, like a lot of it's a good and it makes sense because these platforms are not compensated on giving you diverse opinion. They're compensated on making sure you click and spend more time there, right? Exactly. Which is not evil per se. It's just their business model, right? That's how they make money, right? So if you need to be aware that you're not going to get, if you get all your news from Facebook, you're not going to be a very well informed important person, because you're just going to know, either the right or the left, right? You're going to know basically what you already know. It's not going to show you stuff that you disagree with or have. And they've also become spaces where intelligent debate is being shut down. Right?
Exactly.
It's such a multifaceted problem. And we could probably talk about it over beers in a longer period of time.
But I have to,
I was going to bring it back to like in the agency perspective. I think the being able to partner with legacy media players, I think opens up opportunities for deeper content integration and like different ways to work with them, and also help support. So you're still part of that process, even though there is a bit of a decline when it comes to the efficacy of the channels.
But I feel some advertisers and some brands perhaps underestimate the importance of that challenge today, and perhaps could potentially make an effort at just taking another look at their media buy and just saying, are there opportunities that could develop with La Presse of this world, for instance? Yes, that's going to be different than just my usual Google ads, right? But I think I just hope that some of our Quebec brands and just advertisers in Quebec and of course in Canada as well, will recognize that they do have a certain level of responsibility as well in terms of keeping these guys alive.
Yeah. What I find tough is the responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility of these companies is not to do that, right? So I think it's a good thing, and I hope it works. But it's like when it comes down to the day, it's like the new CMO of a big bank that comes in and has like $50 million budget. Yeah. One that is really digitally aware is going to be like, I just want to increase the LTV and have a good LTV CAC ratio and use personalized data. For sure. They're not going to be like, oh, you know what? I really want to sponsor independent journalism, right? Like, I think it should be part of the broader mission of business in general to think about it as a community. Yeah. But capitalism is pretty ruthless, and I find so it might not be part of the DNA of some of these companies.
Yeah. And we can wrap the conversation at least on that front in a minute. But yes, but that same bank needs those news medias to cover their business in terms of PR and all that. So it's a circle, right?
Yeah. I agree.
So anyway.
we could probably talk about this for a few hours, and I want to be respectful of your time, Louis. And maybe one last question is, where could people find more information about yourself or Cossette?
Yeah. Well, clearly, Cossette.com, of course, our website, always looking for great talent. We have some job openings already in Montreal, but also in Quebec City as well, in Toronto, where we had a lot of growth in the past few years. So, so we're more than welcome to meet new talent.
Very cool. Well, thank you for your time, man.
Thanks for your time. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.